General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, is being accused of treason by many conservatives and Republicans after new revelations emerged that he made secret phone calls to China, promising to give them advanced warning of any potential U.S. strike against them. Now, of course, many on the left are saying this was a good and noble thing to do because Donald Trump was a psychopath. I don't think any of that matters. I think that we had a general undermine the president of the United States by offering up advanced warning to one of our biggest adversaries. And that may absolutely be treason. Now, many are saying maybe it's a violation of the Hatch Act. I think it may possibly be a violation of the Logan Act, which would be interesting. Treason, hard to say. You know, many have said that treason is when there's actually a declaration of war or mark and reprisal, meaning Al-Qaeda or ISIS, or if we're actually at war with China, which we are not legally. Although I think it's fair to say that we are in some kind of war with China, cyber war, for instance, propaganda wars. There's still, it's not kinetic warfare. But I don't know if that matters in today's day and age. And I think we would need to look back and assess the situation to determine whether or not a U.S. general sought to provide aid to a principal enemy of the United States. I think it's a fair assessment. Will anything actually happen? Probably not. Donald Trump isn't in office, but we'll see what happens, come 2024, come 2025. But something else interesting emerges. For one, reporting from Jack Posobiec suggests that people might actually come out, testify against Mark Milley. Maybe there will be some accountability here. But he also highlights a story from January 8th, where Nancy Pelosi says that she has assurances Trump would be stopped from committing any kind of nuclear action. Back on January 8th, the Wall Street Journal called this a coup of Pelosi's own. That Nancy Pelosi went to generals seeking to get them to strip Trump of any authority in the last few weeks of his presidency. She was actually told this would be a military coup. Very interesting. That if the generals subverted or defied the orders of Donald Trump, it would be a military coup. Now we take a look at these revelations. Assuming they're true, CNN reports, and it's an interesting report, I will tell you. Assuming this is true, it would seem that at least one general did attempt to stage some kind of coup and provide aid to an enemy of these United States. Where do we go from here? Honestly, I don't know, but I can tell you we've got other big stories. An officer resignation announced, Fox News reporting. Many servicemen and women are quitting over the vaccine mandate. You've got the left cheering for executive action from Biden that circumvents the legislative and judicial branch, which he's done more than once, and they demand more and more of it, from the eviction moratorium now to the vaccine mandates. It would seem that the executive branch has gone rogue to an extent we've not experienced before. I would say when Barack Obama killed American citizens, that was the executive branch going rogue, but obviously since then, it's only gotten worse. And now with this story, we can see the true depravity and the true fracture in the United States government. We have an establishment left in this country cheering for the dissolution of the U.S. way of governance, the three branches. I think it's over. I don't see how you come back from this. Anyone who gets in office after this will just exacerbate and escalate. If Donald Trump gets in, he'll say we have to undo all of these things, and the left will claim that he's violating his office and abusing his power like they already did. They will not, absolutely not, call out their own for doing the same, which brings us to one inevitable conclusion. Fracturing, peaceful divorce, civil war, I don't know, whatever you think might happen. But so long as you have one side adamant about their right to abuse power and violate the law, we have there's no chance of reconciliation. I want to show you the story first from CNN to show you how they manipulate. And then I'll show you the story from the Washington Post, which gives you a bit more insight to break down the lies. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com, become a member of timcast.com, and you will get access to exclusive members-only segments from the Timcast IRL podcast, as well as you will be supporting our fierce and independent journalism, and you will get an advertisement-free experience. But don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, share the show with your friends. Let's read the story from CNN. Basically just breaking today. Woodward cost a book. Worried Trump could go rogue. Milley took top secret action to protect nuclear weapons. Interesting. Let's see what they say. 2 days after the January 6th attack on the Capitol, President Donald Trump's top military advisor, Joint Chiefs Chairman General Mark Milley, single-handedly took top secret action to limit Trump from potentially ordering a dangerous military strike or launching nuclear weapons, according to Peril, a new book by legendary journalist Bob Woodward and veteran Washington Post reporter Robert Costa. Woodward and Costa write that Milley, deeply shaken by the assault, was certain that Trump had gone into a serious mental decline in the aftermath of the election, with Trump now all but manic, screaming at officials and constructing his own alternative rally about endless election conspiracies. Milley worried that Trump could go rogue, the authors write. You never know what a president's trigger point is, Milley told his senior staff, according to the book. In response, Milley took extraordinary action and called a secret meeting in his Pentagon office on January 8th to review the process for military action, including launching nuclear weapons. Speaking to senior military officials in charge of the National Military Command Center, the Pentagon's War Room, Milley instructed them not to take orders from anyone unless he was involved. My friends, this is a shocking revelation. It means that Nancy Pelosi, when she reached out to the generals and supposedly was rebuffed, she was actually successful. That the generals had said they would circumvent or subvert the president, even if it's in the last few weeks. I'm not going to sit here and act like this was during active presidency. It was a lame duck session. Still, we do not tolerate any of this. We cannot. Even if it was only a few more weeks of Trump's presidency, they were seeking to subvert action by the president before Biden was in office, period. And that may be obviously one of our weakest moments. China knows about how our political system works. Certainly, if they wanted to stage an attack, this would be the opportune moment. Why then would they seek to subvert Donald Trump? Unless there was a prior arrangement with China, perhaps. Turns out there was. Mark Milley set it up. Then later on called a meeting and said, don't take action unless I'm involved. It sounds like treason. I suppose we're lucky China didn't attack or anything like that. But CNN mentions that the meeting was set on January 8th. Let's read more. Quote, no matter what you are told, you do the procedure, you do the process. And I'm part of that procedure, Milley told the officers, according to the book. He then went around the room, looked each officer in the eye, and asked them to verbally confirm they understood. Got it? Milley asked. Yes, sir. Milley considered it an oath. What do you call it when a general goes behind the president's back, telling military officers to swear an oath to him to reject orders from the president? Sounds like a military coup, doesn't it? This country is screwed up. We're screwed. Peril is based on more than 200 interviews with firsthand participants and witnesses. Paints a chilling picture of Trump's final days. Perhaps. I'm not going to sit here and pretend Trump was perfect. No. I'm not going to sit here and say a nuclear war would be good. No, of course not. I'm going to say the system's broken. It's just shattered into a million pieces. You can't cheer on what they did. Let me show you what the Washington Post says. Then you can realize what January 8th really meant. Washington Post reports, top general was so fearful Trump might spark war that he made secret calls to his Chinese counterpart, new book says. Twice in the final months of the Trump administration, the country's top military officer was so fearful that the president's actions might spark a war with China that he moved urgently to avert armed conflict. In a pair of secret phone calls, General Mark A. Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, assured his Chinese counterpart, General Li Zuosheng of the People's Liberation Army, that the United States would not strike, according to a new book by Washington Post associate editor Bob Woodward and national political reporter Robert Costa. One call took place on October 30th, 2020, 4 days before the election that unseated President Trump, and the other on January 8th, 2021, 2 days after the Capitol siege carried out by his supporters in a quest to cancel the vote. Let me just stress, that's a lie. The FBI already concluded there was no plan and no coordination for any kind of insurrection. No one's been charged with insurrection. The FBI said that while some people did plan on getting the building, they had no real plans. So were they trying to cancel the vote? I don't think so. I don't think you can make that assessment if the FBI says there was no coordination. I think it was just people in a state of riot. But okay, perhaps an opinion piece then, Washington Post. Perhaps you should label it as such. The first call was prompted by Milley's review of intelligence suggesting the Chinese believed the U.S. was preparing to attack. That belief, the authors write, was based on tensions over military exercises in the South China Sea and deepened by Trump's belligerent rhetoric towards China. General Lee, I want to assure you that the American government is stable and everything is going to be okay. We are not going to attack or conduct any kinetic operations against you. In the book's account, Milley went so far as to pledge he would alert his counterpart in the event of a U.S. attack, stressing the rapport they'd established through a back channel. General Lee, you and I have known each other for now 5 years. If we're going to attack, I'm going to call you ahead of time. It's not going to be a surprise. Mark Milley made a pledge to a foreign adversary to give them advanced warning of U.S. military operations against them at a time when they are pressuring Taiwan, threatening to invade, sinking Vietnamese fishing vessels, and putting pressure on our military bases in the Pacific. Treason? Perhaps. I'm not a legal scholar. I can certainly say, in the colloquial sense, Milley betrayed the United States and then held a meeting on January 8th where he demanded other officers swear a pledge, an oath to him. It's time to wake up to what's happening in this country, America. This is not a game. This is not something you can just sit by and ignore. And if you refuse to speak up and take action now, well, then forever hold your peace. And I'm sure many of you will choose to do so. Lee took the chairman at his word. The authors write in the book, Peril. In the second call, placed to address Chinese fears about the events of January 6th, Lee wasn't easily assuaged. Even after Milley promised him, we are 100% steady, everything's fine. But democracy can be sloppy sometimes. Lee remained rattled. And Milley, who did not relay the conversation to Trump, according to the book, understood why. The chairman, 62 at the time, and chosen by Trump in 2018, believed the president had suffered a mental decline after the election, the authors wrote. A view he communicated to House Speaker Pelosi in a phone call on January 8th. He agreed with her evaluation that Trump was unstable, according to a call transcript obtained by the authors. Confirming what we knew about Nancy Pelosi's attempt to get generals to subvert the will of the president, confirming that early reporting of her being rebuffed are just wrong. It happened. Nancy Pelosi requested military leaders defy Donald Trump, was told that would be a military coup. But apparently these generals actually did it. Or I should say Mark Milley actually did it and got these other officers to swear that oath. Why should we trust the office of Joe Biden? Something must be done. We need a new administration. I'll tell you this. Nancy Pelosi should be removed from office immediately. She should be impeached. She won't be. The system is fractured. It's broken. We are in deep. The divide is maximized. And I don't know how you actually solve for this. I don't know how you solve for this. They go on to mention Milley summoned senior officers to review the procedures for launching nuclear weapons, saying the president alone could give the order, but crucially that he, Milley, also had to be involved. Looking each in the eye, asking the officers to affirm that they had understood in what he considered an oath. An oath to the Constitution or an oath to an unelected official. That's what they did. I mean, it's convenient. The left and the Democrats will say, but Donald Trump is unhinged. I don't care. That's what the 25th Amendment is for. That's what Mike Pence is for. Not for a separate branch to ask military generals to get officers to swear an oath against the president. Mike Pence is the safeguard to invoke the 25th Amendment. He didn't. So I will not accept their excuses as for why they took this action. It's so convenient, isn't it? Well, we had to subvert the Constitution because the president's nuts. I don't care what your excuse is. There's proper channels for this. Well, of course, we've got Amber Smith saying it's treason. We've got Dana Lash, progressives trying to defend and spin Milley's treason, hate Trump more than they prize the authority of their own consent would a self own. Laverne Spicer, Milley committed treason and needs to be removed from his position at once. You can just see across the board, treason, 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 treason. Many verified conservative personalities saying it's treason. Jack Posobiec reports, at least one of Milley's calls to China was intercepted by a partner nation targeting PRC leadership and resulted in a 5-eye rocket of WTF to Meade and Bowling per IC official. Posobiec reports several Pentagon officers present in Milley's secret meeting are willing to testify against him under oath, per White House official. Take all of it with a grain of salt. This book from Woodward, how do we know this stuff actually happened? Well, we can look at earlier reporting about Nancy Pelosi, and perhaps it's true. As for Jack's reporting on White House personnel, Jack's been very, very right in the past with good sources. Some of it hasn't played out publicly, but Jack has had some big scoops. Again, take all of it with a grain of salt. But I can only say this. If they're reporting numerous outlets that on January 8th, Pelosi did this, and the book confirms it, I'm more likely to believe they actually did this. It's a scary reality. Let me show you what this means. In one story from Inside Paper, Chinese warships, including one of China's most advanced destroyers, spotted sailing in the waters off of Alaska near U.S. exclusive economic zone. I'm not familiar with what this source is. It's not NewsGuard certified as I normally use. They say, here's a photo. At least 3 of the Chinese ships could be seen in the distance in one of the photos released by the Coast Guard. U.S. Coast Guard spotted Chinese warships, including one of its most advanced destroyers, off Alaska near U.S. exclusive economic zone late last month, the U.S. military revealed in photos. It's fair to say, throughout the past year, China has been pressing on U.S. allies and in the South China Sea and the Pacific, often in violation of many treaties. The U.S. recently scrambled aircraft off of, I believe it was the Guam Air Force Base, as well as one other, spreading them around various islands in the Pacific out of fear of a missile strike from China. The U.S. is concerned China could strike. Milley thought it would be appropriate to pledge to them that he would warn them in advance behind the president's back in October, before the election took place. Sorry, there's no excuse for this. I think it's fair to call it treason. China is our principal adversary, promised aid by a U.S. official. At the very least, a violation of the Logan Act, no? Here's the Wikipedia entry for treason. I can't tell you specifically. Treason is, they say, the offense of treason exists both at federal and state levels. The federal crime is defined in the Constitution as either levying war against the U.S. or adhering to its enemies and carries a sentence of death or imprisonment and fine. Specifically, it says giving aid and comfort. Let me see if we'll read the federal law. They say, Article 3, Section 3. Treason is specifically limited to levying war against the U.S. or adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. Do you require all of those? Is it giving aid to the Chinese to call them and swear a pledge that you will warn them? To swear a pledge to a foreign adversary that you would warn them in advance of war, promising them that no attack was imminent? What if we needed them to believe? What if we want China to be concerned that if they try to invade Taiwan, we will attack? What if China is planning to invade Taiwan? And then Mark Milley calls them and says, don't worry, we're not going to attack you. And China says, we're all good. They ain't going to do nothing about it. Treason. How about that? I don't know for sure. Honestly, don't. But throwing it back to Jack, he says, check the date, January 8th. CNN reported, Pelosi says she spoke to General Milley about Trump and the nuclear codes. As it was described by the Wall Street Journal, a coup of Pelosi's own. The House Speaker publicizes her nuclear option to protect the world from Trump. We scoured the U.S. Constitution Friday afternoon, and it's definitely not there. The provision allowing the Speaker of the House of Representatives to intervene in the military chain of command to protect the world from President Trump. Mrs. Pelosi told her Democratic colleagues that she spoke Friday morning to Mark Milley chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to discuss available precautions for preventing an unstable president from initiating military hostilities or accessing the launch codes and ordering a nuclear strike. She posted the Dear Colleague letter on her website to make sure the world got her message. A spokesman for General Milley told reporters the chairman answered her questions. The press and left-wing Twitter love the idea of the speaker inserting herself into the chain of command as a rebuke to an erratic president, but it's an abuse of her own power, which is limited to leading the legislative branch unless both the president and vice president are incapacitated or removed from office. In that case, she is third in line for the presidency. But in the meantime, she has no business telling the Joint Chiefs not to follow the president's orders. General Milley hardly needs the lecture, as he has been dealing with Trump for 15 months and isn't about to indulge in unlawful order, much less an effort to launch nuclear weapons. Mrs. Pelosi's call to General Milley is itself a violation of the separation of powers by seeking to inject herself into an executive branch military decision. She can offer advice, all she wants, but this call at this time has the sound of an order. It might even be construed by some as its own little coup, conniving with the military to relieve of command the person who remains the elected president. What if an adversary leaps on the news and decides this is the moment to stage some military action when the U.S. is consumed with internal conflict? Does General Milley now have to consult with the speaker before he acts in America's defense? How anyone thinks her intervention would restore good constitutional order to government or some modicum of sanity to politics is a mystery. In fact, it wouldn't. What this did was further undermine the separation of powers and contributed to the dissolution of the American way of government. We are hanging but by threads of hair at this moment. Joe Biden has violated the separation of powers numerous times. First with the eviction moratorium, second by re-upping it, this time in violation of not just violating the powers of the legislative branch, but also the judicial, when the Supreme Court said it is illegal, you can't do it, and he said, I'll do it anyway. No scruples. The separation of powers is only as good as the culture willing to enforce it. And Joe Biden violated it and faces no impeachment, no rebuke. Conservatives, of course, are outraged by it. Some independent voters are, of course, outraged by it. But what about the left, the Democratic voter base? They don't seem to care. They like the power. So here we are. They say Mr. Trump failed in his constitutional test Wednesday, but Mrs. Pelosi showed an awful judgment with her grandstanding over the nuclear launch codes. Late Friday, she announced that she's also revving up the impeachment machinery. So much for calling political tempers. I don't see how this stops. There is no check on the Democrats and their abuse of power. Any attempt by any individual to call out the establishment is simply met with tribal derision. Nicki Minaj, yes, celebrity, musician, whatever you want to call her, tweeted out the media was lying about her. So she was accused of being far right. Imagine that. You're a celebrity. The media lies about you. You say, hey, they're lying. And so you are called far right. How dare you oppose the cathedral? What's the solution? But perhaps waking up more voters, pushing them out of the Democratic Party, making more independents and overpowering them culturally, I think is a strong play. And maybe we can regain some power in 2022. The unfortunate thing is Republicans aren't going to do anything. There's a handful of Republicans who might. Maybe Joe Kent. Maybe Sean Parnell in the Senate. We'll see. I'm not convinced. This entire time, we have seen this game of tug of war where the left is pulling as hard as they can and the right is just trying to hold the rope steady. And if that's all you do, you will be pulled forward into the mud and you will lose. Many aren't standing for it, but I think we just have more evidence of decay and collapse. Army officer resigns over Biden vaccine mandate. Marxist takeover of the military. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Douglas Hogg confirmed to Fox News that his resignation process has begun. They say the resignation letter by Lieutenant Colonel Paul Douglas Hogg, tweeted out by his wife and shared with Fox News, said he was resigning from the Army after 19 years of service and foregoing his pension, primarily because of the Pentagon's mandatory COVID vaccine for all U.S. service members. First and foremost, I am incapable of subjecting myself to an unlawful, unethical, immoral, and tyrannical order to sit still and allow a serum to be injected into my flesh against my will and better judgment. It is impossible for this so-called vaccine to have been studied adequately to determine the long-term effects. Now, long-term effects, according to the FDA on the Pfizer vaccine, the only one that's actually been approved, is they're studying it now. So yes, that's true. The FDA and the CDC say it's still safe to get, but many people want to know what the long-term effects may be. That's their personal choice. They're going to say the CDC has said the vaccines are safe and effective. Hogg listed multiple other reasons for his resignation, including what he views as an ideologically Marxist takeover of the U.S. government and their upper echelons, and a complete lack of confidence in the Biden administration, which he blamed for the Kabul attack last month that killed 13 U.S. service members. Quote, I would like nothing more than to continue in the Army to reach my 20 years of active federal service and retire with my pension, he wrote. However, I instead will join those who have served before me in pledging my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor to continue resisting the eternal and ever mutable forms of oppression and tyranny, both from enemies outside our nation's border and those within. Hogg's wife, Katie Phipps Hogg, told Fox News her husband submitted the letter on August 30th and that it has since been sent up his chain of command and appears to be going smoothly so far. She also sought to clarify some discrepancies in the letter that critics used in an effort to debunk the story. For instance, the letter originally dated August 23rd, but the Kabul attack occurred 3 days later. Phipps Hogg said her husband began drafting the letter on August 23rd, revised it multiple times, and forgot to change the original date before submitting it on August 30th. Phipps Hogg also responded to skeptics on Twitter who asked why her husband didn't protest the multiple other vaccines he had to take in order to serve in the military. He didn't resign over a vaccine, she responded. He said he felt the vaccine was being used as a political tool to divide and segregate Americans. He then went on to list many other reasons for his resignation, none of which have anything to do with vaccines. Hogg confirmed to Fox News that his resignation process has begun and that he still stands by what he said. The Army did not respond to Fox News' request for comment. The Pentagon announced on the 23rd that it is requiring all service members to get vaccinated against COVID effective immediately. Military lawyers noted an uptick in calls from service members seeking to understand their rights in light of the mandate. On Monday, demonstrators organized by New Mexico Freedom's Alliance gathered at the Holloman Air Force Base Visitor Center to protest the mandate. The Alamogordo Daily News reported. Here's the way I see this. It's all falling apart. I have heard too many stories about this, many of which you won't hear. I had dinner with a former service member who told me that he resigned over the Marxism, that he was planning a 20-year career, that he wanted to, stay in the military for, until retirement. And he was an officer. And he said that he resigned. And he resigned because of how woke and crazy the military is getting. He doesn't feel he can be effective. The military is being homogenized around those who would blindly follow orders. And where do you think that leads? What do you think that would bring us? Right now, you have many individuals who are, many people who are more individualistic, like this Lieutenant Colonel Paul Douglas, thinking for themselves, saying they will make decisions for themselves and they will assume the risks on their own. Many others saying, I don't care, just tell me what to do. This is causing a split in the culture of this country between those who are more authoritarian, communistic, fascistic, and those who are more libertarian, classically liberal or liberty-minded. Where does this lead? I'd imagine some kind of civil war. Yeah, I know that I've said that we're in one, and we are. It's just fourth and fifth generational. What does that mean? Well, it's a cold civil war in the sense that in the Cold War with Russia, we had many conflicts between Russian influences and U.S. influences, right? Russia was in Afghanistan. We pushed back on the communists in Vietnam and North Korea. We tried in in Vietnam. And that was effectively us pushing back on the Soviets without actually engaging in conflict with Russia, though we were very close to blowing each other up. What do we have now? Well, we have propaganda warfare. We have one faction in the government just absolutely violating every tenet of U.S. Government function, abusing their authority and power while the media lies to defend them, and a large faction cheers behind them. Meanwhile, in the streets, people are being shot at and shot. It's been going on for years. From Provo, Utah to Portland just a couple weeks ago, people are being shot. We had a man get out of his car and a bunch of Antifa people drew their guns on him. He drew his gun on them. That's how dangerously close we are. Now, are we going to say that there's uniformed troops marching through the street? Well, that's not happening. But that's not civil war. In the United States, we call it a civil war because we're a union of states. And each state was sovereign. States banded together, creating two separate unions, or a confederacy and a union, and they fought. And the union won and then said, you are back in the union. You can't just leave. We sacrificed blood and treasure for you to come. You can't just go follow the rules. See, it was different. Today, we're dealing with ideological pockets all over the country. Even in West Virginia, there's areas that are ultra woke, smaller cities. What people need to understand about the American Civil War is that I believe it was 7 states seceded from the Union before there was a war. And it was only after several more that Abraham Lincoln, who was occupying Fort Sumter, basically said, we're not going to let this happen. South Carolina, I think it was South Carolina, said, yo, get your troops out of our state. You're not welcome here anymore. Shooting broke out. And then I think it was the shooting that triggered a bunch of other states to secede from the Union, triggering effectively the Civil War and the creation of the Confederacy. And that's why many in the South called it the War of Northern Aggression. The North viewed it as you can't just leave the Union. That's not permitted. Ulysses S. Grant said that we've sacrificed blood and treasure to admit you, and you owe that debt. The North won, obviously. And I think it was morally correct. Slavery was wrong. Not the only issue involved. Many states seceded because of what they viewed as tyranny, but for the most part, slave states. Virginia fractured into 2 states over this, West Virginia and Virginia. And there you go. I mean, the history is a lot more complicated. If military service members with training, expertise, and years in the service are resigning now, these people aren't just going to walk away from their morals and their principles. And if the military is now comprised mostly of people who would blindly follow orders, what do you think we're heading towards? We've heard it before. Who would have thought we'd heard it? Who would thought you'd never hear it again? No, I think we will. And I think it may get kinetic, but it won't look like 1860s. It will look like pockets here and there, fighting in the streets like they already are, but scaling up much more significantly until there's actually several states saying no to the federal government. I mean, already you can see what's happening in Texas. They're saying the ATF can shove off. They're making suppressors, can't do nothing about it. So we'll see. We will see. There's not going to be accountability for Hillary Clinton and the email server. There's not going to be accountability for Dr. Fauci lying. There's not going to be accountability for Mark Milley giving a pledge to China to assist them in the event the U.S. sought to attack them. So what's left? Next segment's coming up tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.